Is Great Houses of Calderia the next evolution in the family/empire management grand strategy arena? Or is it a fantasy shroud over a lame attempt at creating Crusader Kings Lite? Watch on and find out. My name is Thoraxe, and this is Strategy for Busy People. If you've got a few minutes, I'll tell you what to play. I spent 6 hours poking at Great Houses of Calderia by Resistance Games in an effort to try to figure out if it was a grand strategy game that I could really get behind. If you watched my review of Crusader Kings 3, you know that in spite of having no idea what I was doing, I quite enjoyed the game and feared it would suck me into ridiculously deep depths from which I might never return. Great Houses of Calderia at first glance looks like it could be a lighter weight version of Crusader Kings, if you don't find CK to be that approachable. I have to say, Calderia definitely has some issues. It has a lot of completely unique things, too. Let's see how it shakes out. By the way, I apologize for the lack of game audio in some of the clips. I borked my OBS recording somehow. I'll pay more attention in the future. On to the review. When you bill your game as quote-unquote feudal grand strategy focusing on family dynamics and stories, you are going to be compared to Crusader Kings. I'm sorry, that's just how it goes. The CK series, to me, invented this genre, and Paradox has moved to try to perfect it through each iteration. The immediate problem you will have with the comparison, though, is that this game isn't Crusader Kings. But so much of it gives the sense of having directly ripped things from Crusader Kings, especially when it comes to the user interface. It's hard to not continually make the comparison. I'll do my best to evaluate Calderia on its own merits, because if you try to judge a fish by its ability to ride a bicycle, you'll always be disappointed with one of the two things. Calderia takes place in a literal, made-up place, with a unique, seemingly fantasy-inspired backstory. The map is a giant island divided up into territories. The classical feudal system of barons, dukes, viceroys, etc. is there. Your kingdom is made up of many characters, each with their own stats in one of several different categories. So far, so good. You control all of the characters, which are your family, and engage in many different activities on the map. The game is played in a real-time mode with a pause ability, and sending your characters to interact with faraway fiefdoms will take quite some time. Fundamentally, the game is all about managing the relationships between your territory and the other territories. This includes going to war with them. But in its own unique twist on the genre, you never take over other territories. You are always stuck in your own little fiefdom. But that's okay. Despite being weird, the gameplay mechanics were built around this. So, let's start with your fiefdom. Managing the productive aspects of your fiefdom is a key part of the game. You have several different base resource types that are pretty expected for this type of game background. Crops, grapes, building materials, animals, and ore. Then you also have quote-unquote manufactured goods, which are produced from some of the base goods. Horses are an odd type of manufactured good, but we'll go with it. Each of the production areas is managed by assigning workers to it. The size of your kingdom's population determines the number of workers available for assignment. The worker pool has a happiness score, which is important because overall worker happiness in the fiefdom is the determining factor in whether or not your population grows. Growing the population is vitally important because growing your kingdom requires additional buildings that change the requirements on resources, and it's really all intertwined. Additionally, you can assign family members to be overseers of production. This can provide bonuses or penalties to happiness, production, and other stats, depending on the abilities of your family member. Buildings in your fiefdom can grant all different kinds of benefits. It can grant companion or military units, which we'll talk about later. It can provide production benefits and unlock different worker wage and effort tiers, which are related to both happiness and production, and so much more. As you would expect in a grand strategy game, there is a lot going on in the management of your fiefdom. When your family members aren't busy screwing up great production, you can send them on official visits to other kingdoms. There, they can soundly embarrass you and generally totally screw things up. Or they could improve the relations between the two kingdoms. Characters have traits that can influence the outcome of encounters when evaluated against the traits and skills of the opposing characters. It's all quite reminiscent of CK, but slightly different. The one thing about the system of encounters that really annoys me is that you often have absolutely no idea what the outcome will be, even when things are seemingly stacked in your favor. As an example, when an official visit option claimed to compare military skill and my character had 4 more points plus some other buffs, and the encounter still went badly, it was very confusing. I'd love for the game to provide the statistical chance so that I can better make a decision on the outcome, but maybe it's just not trying to be that kind of game. It doesn't make it less annoying. Official visits are just one type of task you can send family members on. As you would expect, and right out of Game of Thrones, your family members can be installed in a foreign court to improve relations. They can begin a courtship sequence in order to try to get married. They can appeal to your allies for support in times of war. All of it makes sense, more or less. When I mentioned resource and fiefdom management earlier, I also mentioned that resources are required to build things in your fiefdom. But you can't produce everything, certainly not at first, and you will likely need to specialize. This means that to construct some buildings, you have to figure out where to get resources from. And this is where the trade system comes into play. Your family members can go off to try to negotiate trade deals, which are kind of like the other encounters, but are slightly different. It seems a lot like you might see on diplomacy screens in some other games. The meter tells you what each party thinks of the deal, and then the interaction between the two traders might sway things one way or another. There's a whole system of intrigue and spying that can be used to do nasty things to your neighbors. I'm not going to go into it much, but it's there. I have to say that the absolute weirdest thing, and the wildest departure from anything I've seen before in this genre, is the node-based conflict system. I'll remind you of the frequent Sid Meier quote about not building multiple kinds of games. Well, this node-based conflict system is absolutely 100% a special and unique minigame that takes place inside Great Houses of Calderia. And I have to say, I also kind of hate it because it's just so weird. I mentioned those companions and military units before, right? Well, this is where they come into play. You see, certain social events, like deciding on the various outcomes of a marriage, are resolved through this node-based conflict system. The main character brings companions along and essentially conducts oral arguments with the opponents in social conflicts, trying to capture nodes in this weird minigame that reminds me of Chinese checkers on acid. Your companions and character have various special abilities, and there's a whole rock, paper, scissors, rock thing going on underneath that determines various buffs too. Yes, there's a tutorial that explains this system. No, it didn't make any sense. It also takes an absolutely bloody annoying amount of time to resolve conflicts. Fortunately, you can let the AI try to do it for you with the auto-resolve system. You simply indicate which outcome you want to emphasize or de-emphasize and let the dice roll in the background. After having poked at it a few times, I absolutely hate it and will probably not use it ever again in favor of auto-resolving. Unlike CK, this game also has a definitive goal, and you can see what the objectives are at each step of the way. Ultimately, your goal is to take over the whole of Calderia, replace the viceroy, and then decide whether to wage war against or support the king. I certainly got nowhere near that objective, but that's okay. There's a whole lot more to the game that I didn't go into, but there's also a whole lot missing from what you might expect of a quote-unquote family dynastic management game. But this game is its own thing, so maybe compare or maybe don't. Before I give my final verdict, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to share with your friends. Agree with me, disagree with me, or want to see other content? Let me know in the comments below. Want to try this game yourself? Check out my humble affiliate link below. And if you want to support me in making more of these videos, become a patron on Patreon. Your support really makes a difference. The final verdict. While this is an early version 1 release of Great Houses of Calderia, some cracks in the surface are showing. The UI is a little buggy, and apparently some game features are majorly bugged. I didn't encounter any showstoppers or any mega messed up behaviors in my playtime, but I didn't get all that far into the game with only 6 hours of play. Take that for what it might be worth. All of that being said, the game kept me interested and got me looking into tutorials and strategy guides, which is always a good sign. In some ways, it is definitely more approachable than Crusader Kings, but in other ways, I definitely had no idea what I was doing. Also, just like Crusader Kings. One concern is the relatively low number of reviews on Steam and a passing comment in the official Discord about the developer's previous game essentially turning into abandonware due to a lack of commercial success. On my trademarked 3-point score scale of avoid, meh, and I forgot to eat, I was eager to trade my horses for the wine I needed for my upcoming nuptials, only to realize that being away from the fiefdom left my food production low and contributed to no family members being around to raise an army. While I didn't hit the 10-hour mark, it was good in spite of the CK comparisons and its shortcomings. And I also, weirdly, am feeling pulled to it and wanting to explore more. Except for that awful node conflict system. But maybe I just didn't give it enough time. Oh crap, the dinner bell.